We have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now.
Hey, welcome back to Let Me Tell You Why That's Bullshit. How are you doing this week, Rio?
Not too bad. So, aside from juking the rubric in one of my classes, I've had a lot of good things happen this week. So I'm pretty happy.
Tell me one good thing, because I've just had flu all week and I'm cranky.
Ooh.
Besides your essay thing.
The free A that I got, even though I didn't say
something else.
Let's see. I got a coupon that I get to use later today. I'm just excited about that.
In this economy.
Yeah, save $10 on a pair of pants and a t-shirt. Why not?
And yet that still won't go back to pre-Trump dollar.
Yeah, I know that. And here's the thing: it's like $10 off on a $75 purchase, but so really, I'm saving 10-15% ish, and I'm not going to turn my nose up at it, and but it's also Uniqlo, so I'm not buying anything Canadian. I'm literally just buying Japanese clothes. So
as long as it's not American, you're fine.
Yeah. And actually, another really funny thing happened. So I was at the Supplement King the other day looking for creatine and stuff. And then the guy saw me really staring down and reading the label on everything. And he's like, "Are you okay?" I'm literally just looking for Made in Canada. And the one that I had was Made in Canada. So I pulled it up this is it. Made in Canada. This is what I was looking for. It's like, "Oh yeah, I feel like we're another one. There's another one right there." I was like, hell yeah, Canadian supplement brands. So I learned a lot this week.
That reminds me. Remind me later to show you the stickers I made. To everybody else, we have stickers coming, and they're pretty funny. We'll announce that next podcast, but
I have one that I still have yet to put in my water bottle. So
that one's great. These ones are America stickers. They're Trump related.
Okay.
And, I got to show Rio the templates for them, and then I'll put them up on our shop, which I want to launch pretty soon as well with our other stickers.
Yeah.
But I think you'll like them. That's what I did last week. I made stickers.
Awesome.
And they're basically fuck Trump stickers, but not straight up.
They are, but they aren't. Right?
Yeah. I think they're pretty clever. So remind me after this. I got to show them to you.
All right.
So let's start, because this week has been insane. Between Canada and the US disappearing people and being incompetent with their national security. So we're going to talk about all of that this week. But let's start first with Canadian elections, because obviously that is sort of the big thing happening in Canada, because we need a leader that can deal with Trump, because everything is about Trump now, apparently. Yep. So I guess first I'll just give this quick round out of what happened this week. So both parties. Okay, I should also say that we are going to talk a little bit about NDP and what they've said they're going to do. But at this point, we should all just be aware that we're now in this two-party election at this point. But I do want to make sure that we are giving talking about the NDP, because they are technically a pretty big party in Canada. And we'll talk more about polls and stuff later. But just because it's an ABC election, I don't want to completely ignore their policy. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because I've seen a few bits of Jagmeet Singh and the NDP on CBC in the last few days, and he does have things that I think make a lot of sense, right? But at the same time, we're kind of just staring down the barrel of Donald Trump threatening to annex Canada, right? And that's what people are kind of thinking about most. And even this morning, I saw a thing on CBC about what voters are most concerned about in Alberta, and they're like, you know what, maintaining the peace and making sure that we can maintain our sovereignty as a country, right?
The only difference is in Alberta, they think that rage is what's good against rage. So
yeah, and although I will say it was kind of shocking to see, for this particular CBC News segment, it was a bunch of younger Canadians. I'm talking maybe 18 first-time voters to early to mid 20s who have voted in maybe one other election. I was like, oh my god. I've never seen this before.
Well, and here's the thing with Gen Z, which we can talk a little bit more about when we talk about polls and stuff, but there's good and bad here, depending on your perspective. The good is younger Canadians are, because of the situation, because they lived through COVID, like they're much more politically aware, or like want to be. So even my niece, who she's very bright, but she just doesn't like, she's more concerned with like video games, right? Like a normal kid. But every once in a while she'll hear like either her dad or her mom or one of her grandparents like say something. And we live in Alberta, so I'm like the only liberal in this group of people, right? And so she'll like be like, Auntie, my dad said this, and it'll be some like crazy conspiracy thing. Like, not that he's a conspiracy theorist, but like he'll see stuff on Facebook, right? Like everyone else, and be like, oh, that's insane. Or she'll see like the condom thing, the from the US, how like it started going around that like they were funding condoms for US aid, that like 150. Did you not hear about this?
I
like
feel like I did. But...
Yeah, I know. It feels like so long ago, right?
Yeah.
Like back when the USAID thing was the story of the day, Trump said that like there was $150 million worth of like condom funding in US aid. And she was like, Auntie, did you hear about this? And I was like, oh my God, stop getting your news from TikTok.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is that, especially in the US and especially among men, there's a huge like right-wing surge in these young voters, especially white men, because they, growing up in an era that went like, tried to correct, you know, sexism and racism, and they feel like
victims, I guess, in a sense, right?
Yeah, right? Because like a white guy doesn't understand really that, yes, you can have it hard. Like there are definitely poor white people that have a hard time getting jobs and that kind of thing, right? But you are not in the condition you're in because of your skin color.
Yeah.
You're there for other economic factors, which is also bad.
Yeah.
But it's not because of your skin color. So they don't understand that like core white privilege part, right? Like they don't understand giving in a resume with a name on it that's not like Steve.
Yeah. Or even like I had one instructor, and this is like back when I was at the UFC, like for the first time, like I don't know, 2013, and she was a sociology instructor, and she was saying like she was getting interviews because she had a more masculine sounding name.
Yep.
Because like even though she was Indian, right? So it was really interesting to hear that too, right? Yeah.
Bunch of hypocrites.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. She was like, yeah, so it was really weird to like, you know, every time I got an email back, it's like, oh, dear Mr. Da 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 da. I don't remember what her name was. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I never thought about that before. Because every time I've gotten an email back, like my name is pretty obviously like, you know, pretty obviously masculine. My legal name is, or my legal name is pretty obviously masculine. Like the name everyone knows me by, Rio, is like kind of a bit more neutral. So like, I think people just tend to assume like, oh, Rio, that sounds guy-ish.
Yeah, well, I get that a lot too, because I'm Nicole, but like I go by Nick. So like even, oh my God, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but it's really funny. So my husband's been working where he's been for like, I think this is year 8 now, 7 or 8. So a long time. And a couple of years ago, no, more than that, because it was pre-COVID, we went to like the Christmas party. And I just remember Rob like introduced me to somebody and they went, oh, and he was like, what? And they were like, I don't know, we just all thought you were gay. And he was like, what? Okay. And then they were like, yeah, sorry about that. And he was like, I don't fucking care.
But I can clear up the misunderstanding.
I get that all the time, even like streaming video games and stuff. I tend to use a PNG, which for our political nerd friends that don't play video games is just like a VTuber, basically, like a little cartoon character on the screen. So I don't tend to show my face very often, but every time I do, somebody's like, oh, I thought you sounded like a woman. And I was like, what the? Okay.
I mean,
sure.
I've met dudes who sounded a lot like women. So like,
it's so funny. But
yeah.
I've also noticed that when I show my face, this is like a total side thing. Suddenly, like, people don't like the video games I'm playing, and I lose like some of the male audience. And I'm like, guys, come on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to the economy.
Yeah.
That has kind of been where the focus has been by all of the leaders this week. Both leaders have proposed tax cuts. It's actually kind of interesting, and I think this is what's kind of frustrating for the conservatives. Not only are they running against like Carney and Trump, Carney is basically your PC, right? He is like your centrist, conservative, well, like you said, red Tory, basically, right?
Yeah.
So all of his policies, like, I'm actually kind of surprised that Polyev hasn't come out and been like, he's just stealing what we say.
Yeah.
Which isn't true, because you can go back and read his books from years ago and they all say like the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So Mark Carney pledged this week to lower the income tax rate from 15% to 14% for the middle class, which would save, like they said, on average, like $900 a year, which is quite significant to some people. Or for people like me, when this is going to sound so privileged and I apologize, but when my husband heard that, he was like, there you go, Nick, your Switch 2 is paid for. I'm sorry. Because I know some people are like, great, you're getting a Switch 2. You know what I'm going to use that for? Groceries.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he said he's going to drop it by 1%. Polyev said he was going to drop the lowest to 12.5%, which would save anybody in that income bracket about $800 a year. So they're basically the same, except that Mark Carney is targeting middle class and Polyev is trying to be like lower class worker friendly.
Yeah.
Carney also announced automotive industry support as soon as the rumors came about the tariffs staying, which I'm sure was also partially because he had announced earlier in the week, well, not announced, but like a reporter asked him, like, when are you going to talk to Trump? And he was like, when Trump starts respecting us. So I don't think, and we'll talk about it a little further down, but I don't think he actually expected to have that phone call with Trump on Friday. So he announced a $2 billion fund to bolster our automotive sector to try to protect jobs. Yep. I think it's important to note that, like, that's good. We want to protect jobs, but like these tariffs could absolutely destroy the automotive industry in North America, which is kind of ironic. Yeah. Because this tariff has the ability to like literally collapse an integrated system. Like, you can't just prop up a factory in the US in like overnight. It's not going to happen. And North America's automotive sector is like so integrated that like it's a precise system of like certain parts cross the border and then they like cross into Mexico and then they come back, and it's just like this weave of integrated things. Yeah. And now these tariffs are just gonna fuck every single country.
Yeah. And like, we spent literal decades building up an economy economies that are so integrated, right? Because like you can literally see from Hamilton, Ontario into the United States, because the border is literally like, it's basically just a road.
It's like, right? Windsor and Detroit.
Yeah,
Windsor?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Windsor, I think. Yeah, and then Hamilton's just nearby too. Like, again, large manufacturing center. And then we have all these parts across the border over and over and over again. But like, the reason why we do that is because it makes it work better, the whole entire point, like the entire idea behind capitalism is that you can like specialize in something and then you get paid for that specialization. And that's what we've done is we've specialized certain factories for like certain parts and like certain like, you know, components and certain stages of the process. And now Donald Trump's threatening to just completely like pull the rug out from under that and just topple the entire tower. But yeah, again, I stand by this. It's a stupid policy for like no reason that hurts everyone in North America, right? And we're past the point of like manufacturing being like the key to GDP. Like we are so far past that we need. Go for it.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but like, here's what's really hilarious. I was watching. What was I listening to? I can't remember. I was catching up on all my like political podcasts of the week. And one of them was talking about, I think it might have been Pod Save, but I don't remember. They were talking about how what's really funny about all of this is tariffs are like super useful when you like target a thing, right? Like when it's like, okay, so for example, the CHIP Act, right? Biden put tariffs on chips specifically because he had propped up, he wanted to move like the manufacturing of the chip factories into, was it Arizona? Yeah, Arizona. But they already had like the factory infrastructure there. And he successfully moved those. So what was really fun? Oh, I know who it was. It was Acosta's podcast, and he had on Pete Buttigieg. That's what it was. Pete was talking about it. And he said, like, there are definitely things that the Biden administration had like messed up on, right? Like immigration. But if you look at like the economy, things that were going well in the economy was the stock markets. And they were actually already bolstering manufacturing in the US. So he was like, what Trump's doing is like destroying that and not helping in areas that he could be helping in. And so like, I just was like, this is hilarious because I didn't actually know that, right? Like I follow US news like pretty closely, but not like that integrated. So it was like really interesting listening to him like talk about the economy factors. And so like, of course Trump would be like, well, let's destroy what's already being fixed and well on its way. So yeah, it's like, it's really scary. And with him being like, he lives in Michigan, which has a lot of factory jobs and stuff. So they're already seeing the impacts of this, right? Which, by the way, I'm sure he's going to run for Senate there in a year. So then from there this week, Carney ended the week with speaking to Trump on Friday. This was really interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but not only is this interesting, it has the potential to be really bad for Polyev. So I'm just going to read out what Trump said. So he said, I just finished speaking with Prime Minister Mark Carney. That's important. Trump wrote on a Truth Social. The one line is notable in its own, given Trump repeatedly called former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau governor. And then he goes on to say, we agree on many things and will be meeting immediately after Canada's upcoming election. So clearly he has seen the pulse. To work on elements of politics, business, and other factors that will end up being great for both the United States of America and Canada. Speaking in the Oval Office later that day, he said, we had a very good conversation. Mark called me today at 10 a.m. We had a very, very good talk. He's going through an election now, and we'll see what happens. So there's a few things here. He also said, I didn't grab the exact quote, but he also talked about like how he said the world's ripping us off. And then he was like, but not Canada. And I was like, this is so weird.
So it was really weird to see like such a change in tone, right? Especially after like the last 4 months of basically being like antagonized and threatened. And like,
and I think it's because he like, Mark Carney was like, no, fuck you.
Yeah, I saw, I guess I read a comment I thought was really funny where someone was like Donald Trump's probably not used to having like an actual adult in the room these days, right? So like Mark Carney
that
probably
was actually said by I don't know if they saw that or it's just a running theme, but the conservative strategist person, like a former campaign manager who now is a panel member on Power and Politics, was specifically asked by David, the host of the show, about that. And he was like, so what do you think of this? And he was like, I think an adult wrote his speech.
Yeah.
And that post.
Yeah. And the caveat to that is that we all know that something Donald Trump says one day will absolutely be contradicted within like the next 2 weeks. Right?
The next week. How about the next hour?
Yeah, true. So like I was being kind of generous because I haven't heard anything since that like call. So I was like, oh, is this...
Yeah, it's weird. And then Carney said at a thing that the prime minister said he and Trump agreed to sit down and negotiate a comprehensive new economic and security relationship between the two countries should Carney win next month's federal election. Yeah. I made it clear that I'll be working very hard over the next month to earn the right to represent Canada in those discussions. In the interim, he said, cabinet members will continue to stay in touch with their U.S. counterparts, including Lutnick.
Yeah.
Fucking Lutnick.
Yeah. And like, on the topic of like our new economic and security relationship, Canada's already begun more investment in NORAD, right? Like I saw last week or the week before that we're partnering with an Australian company, I believe it was, to upgrade the systems that are up there, right? And then, we even have Paul Liev talking about building bases without consulting the Indigenous people in the area, which was like
the first thing Mark Carney pointed up.
Yeah.
He was like, well, Polyev went up to the Arctic yesterday, and you know who he didn't talk to? Indigenous people there.
Yeah, and like it's just one of those things where it's like it's clearly on everyone's mind, right? And then I also just wanted
Russia's flying planes and shit in there, and Trump's like, "We're gonna take over Greenland."
Yeah, and I saw on CBC this morning too. It was like one kid being like, "I think all the party leaders are kind of on a more warmongering path." I'm like, I mean, building up your security is not warmongering. Right? It's deterrence.
Russia and China are in this like melting waters. You better get your asses up to the Arctic or you're going to lose it.
Exactly. Right. And like we've literally seen, Russia take Crimea, Russia invade Ukraine, Taiwan China and talk about invading Taiwan.
We saw this week Putin try to further U.S. economic and security interests by saying, and I quote, I understand why they want Greenland.
Yep.
So all of you people that are going to come after me in the comments for your TDS crap, fuck off.
Yeah. Like it's pretty, like you have to be like really not paying attention because this is very obvious. Like the Arctic is the new.
Yeah.
Like,
and we can't
target.
trust the US. I don't care like that Trump has a slight tone change.
Yeah. It's a tone change after one call, right?
He has very like, he's a lot like Putin in this way, right? Like Putin thinks that he should have control of his backyard.
Yeah.
Trump thinks that they should have control of their backyard. That's all that's happening here is like this imperialistic, weird ass boomer thing.
Yeah, this very World War II mindset, right?
Yeah, and like when you think about it, like Trump was born in 1946, which like as a side note, like we really need younger people to be running in government because I'm kind of tired of all these 80-year-old white men and their BS and like being stuck in the 30s because like this manufacturing stuff, it's the same idea. Trump stuck in like the 30s through 60s being like, yeah, the way to get jobs in the US is manufacturing. No, they're not good jobs anymore.
And like I was saying earlier, like we're so far past the point where like, jobs and GDP and manufacturing are like what you need because like you have to, if you want your economy to succeed, you need GDP growth, right? You can't just give people jobs and be like, yep, this is fine. Because we live in a world that's just so interconnected and globalized that you can't get away from that. You want to remain competitive, you need your economy to grow. And then, pulling the rug out from a giant, like from the auto manufacturing center, like in all of North America, just doesn't do that, right? Like you need access to markets in order to have that growth. And cutting off access to markets is how you do the exact opposite of that, and you shrink your economy.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to what the conservative leader said this week. Besides, like, okay, one of the most interesting things I heard before I get into what he said was, and this again was from the former conservative strategist guy on CBC. He said that Polyev is trying to run a campaign from 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Right? And you can see that even with like, and every day, like every time I see him talk, it seems like he's standing behind a different quote on a sign.
Yeah.
Like trying to just like figure out what's going to stick here.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I thought was quite interesting and hilarious and also a flat out lie, if you know anything about Polyev or like bothered to pay attention to him during the Harper government, was the union endorsement he got this week. Did you see this? The International Brotherhood of Boilermakers endorsed Polyev's bid for prime minister. Okay. We want to fuck over our members.
Yeah.
That's what I see from that. Polyev has repeatedly, over and over and over, tried to pass or has passed anti-labor legislation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what makes people think that and he said this himself, and this is what's so frustrating. We saw it with Trump. Trump literally went out there and was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then all of his voters now are like, well, what do you mean the leopard eating people's face party is eating my face?
Yeah.
And Polyev's no different. Like he said, I'm the same. Like he literally said, I've always been consistent. So it's clear that what he did under Harper, he's just going to do again. And he hasn't exactly changed his tune much. We did see this week that he's trying to be a lot friendlier to reporters. He has this like union thing. So it's clear that he's shifting a little bit to try to go after like the center.
Yeah.
And I'm just really worried that Canadians might fall for it. And then they'll be all upset when he starts, focusing on tax cuts for the rich. Even his affordable housing plan,
yeah,
which we've talked about before. His plan is no taxes on new houses. Well, who's that going to help? It's certainly not going to help anybody who's renting.
Yeah.
And like, on what planet are first-time homeowners buying new houses?
Yeah.
They're not, because
No.
they're expensive.
Yeah.
Whereas Carney's housing plan, he did take one of those tax approaches. But what was interesting in his tax approach to that was he said, new places only up to $1 million, which means, yeah, but you know why? It's so that rich people who are buying houses over $1 million aren't going to get that GST cut on it.
Yeah.
But if you also think about it from the perspective of like, when new homeowners are buying new, it's condos.
Yeah.
Right? So like putting that caveat there and capping it is interesting, to say the least. And it also has the potential to bring costs down a little bit, because you're going to see, if they do that, you're going to see banks being like, well, we're not going to lend you that money because you're going to be paying GST on this, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're like somebody that's like trying to negotiate your contract and they come back at like 1.2 million for some like shack in Toronto, you're going to be like, well, no, like the bank's not going to approve that. So this is my offer, take it or leave it. And that like is small.
Yeah.
And I think it was Steve Boots this week, another political podcaster, I think. Anyway, somebody I saw on YouTube, a lot's been going on, had like a picture for their thumbnail, and it was like all three leaders, and he was like going to talk about their housing plan, and it said like bad, worse, and terrible on it, which is kind of where we're at on like affordability.
Yeah.
And the shitty part about this is it's not going to matter because it's about Trump. So like they don't really have to focus too much on affordability, which I think is sad personally.
Yeah, it is. And like just on the kind of rewinding a bit back to the union endorsement. I
That's so funny.
Yeah, I did a quick Google search. The Canadian Labour Congress literally comes out and says in an article that came out 4 days ago that you can't really trust Pierre Poilievre to do anything that's any sort of like pro-labor stuff. And I just thought it'd be worth like kind of like digging into his voting record a little bit, including voting against the FHSA program in 2022, the Bill C-19, voting against $10 a day childcare, and also voting against raising the minimum wage. Pierre Poilievre has also voted against middle-class tax cuts in 2015, Bill C-2. Voted against the increase to the old age security, Bill C-30 in 2021. And where was it? There was a really relevant one here. Oh, yeah, here it is. Voted in favor of using scabs to weaken union strikes, Bill C-525 in 2013 under Stephen Harper. And where was it? There's another really interesting one that I saw. Oh, here it is. Bill C-377, Attack on Unions in 2012, required union financial disclosure. Yeah. So like this is someone who's very clearly and consistently done anti-union and anti-labor things throughout his entire political career. And again, this guy's been in politics for like, what, 15, 20 years? Yeah, 20 years since I was in grade school.
Yeah, he went in when he was 20. He literally was paper boy, did his degree at USC, and then went into politics. He earned a $120,000 pension by the time he was 31 years old.
God damn, I wish.
What's really funny about this is he keeps saying like, and don't get me wrong, like Carney. So one of the first things my husband said when we were talking about the whole like Trump suddenly changing his tunes was, well, billionaire is gonna billionaire. Yep. So like, make no mistake about it. Like Carney is definitely in that world too. Yep. But it's hilarious to me that you have Poilievre being like, oh, well, he can't relate to the working class people like I can, when in like January he faced backlash because he was playing ball hockey with children in $2,000 sneakers.
Yeah.
So like, let's not pretend that any of these politicians understands any of that, right?
Yeah. None of them really understand the struggle, right?
No. And I mean, I know that like, I'm actually not sure what Poilievre's childhood was like. So it's totally possible that he also grew up poor. But Mark Carney was the son of two teachers.
Yeah.
And was born in the
Northwest Territories.
But like, he did not grow up like, but that he's 60 now. Like, he might not even remember what that's like. So don't get me wrong here. Like, I'm not saying that like they can relate, because I don't think any politician really can, outside of maybe AOC for the next little while, because she still remembers what it's like to be a waitress.
Right.
Yeah, it's so frustrating to me.
Quick skimming of Poilievre's Wikipedia page. Born in June 3rd, 1979 in Calgary, Alberta, to 16-year-old high school student Jacqueline Farrell, whose mother had recently died. So like, he's probably coming from like a decent amount of struggle, so like, he probably gets a little bit, but at the same time,
give him that.
Yeah, brother, you're wearing $2,000 sneakers playing hockey with kids nowadays with a, what was it, $20,000 pension? Like
$120,000.
Oh, $120,000 pension. Like, you're not going to know struggle for the rest of your life. Like, quit acting like it.
He and so like, yeah, he probably does understand that, but like, what's so interesting about that is it really demonstrates like how people are like somehow convinced to vote against their best interests. So like, I remember, for example, my sister, who is a terrible human being, but she's poor. She has 3 kids from 2 different dads, which is fine. But the reason I bring it up is because neither, like her first kid's dad has that kid. And then the other one, I don't think is in the picture, but I haven't talked to her in like 5 years. So I don't know. But the point is, she's a single mom. She has 3 kids, 2 of which she has like live with her. She lives in like I guess what would be the equivalent of like welfare housing. It's like affordable housing the city has. And I remember her, like the 2019 election. Was there an election in 2019? Yeah, I think there was, because it was right before COVID, right?
Yeah, that was the one where Justin Trudeau called to change literally nothing.
Right. Yeah. I remember her calling my mom, who is a conservative at the time, because they had like money and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I remember her being like, well, who should I vote for? And I remember my mom being like, well, I'm voting conservative, but you should be voting NDP, because like conservatives are not in your best interest. And interestingly enough, she lived at the time in the university area of Calgary.
Yeah.
So that area is like the only riding in which like the NDP have any shot at all.
Yeah.
Of course, that was a federal election, so like it didn't matter, and the Conservatives won. But the point is, it's just really interesting how like people can be convinced to like vote against their own self-interest, right?
Yeah.
And that the rhetoric from the right somehow convinces them that like cutting those programs are good, but like they don't understand like you're using the program. It's like when Trump was like, we're going to cut Obamacare. And then a whole bunch of people realized that Obamacare is the Affordable Care Act. And they were like, oh shit, I use that.
Yeah. And like, and we talked about this a few times, how like language matters, right? And like, that's how they get you though, is like, they'll be like, oh yeah, it's this thing, masking what it actually is as something that would be hostile. It's something that people would feel hostile towards, right? Because like people towards the end of Obama's term were mad at Obama. I'll absolutely concede that point. But like people would be against getting rid of the Affordable Health Care Act, but they would be against Obamacare. And that's why you saw that rhetoric shift, right? And like I have a cousin here, and he's still like, very like, up Trump's butt. But like
good old
Alberta. Yeah, and even he was like, no, they got to get rid of Obamacare. I'm like, you mean the Affordable Care Act? He's like, no, Obamacare. I'm like, no, dude, like, have you actually been paying attention, or are you just like, are you just parroting?
Also, does he use our healthcare system? Because
yeah, he does. Like, and I like, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, you can't be like saying like, let's get rid of all these things when you're the one who's using like all of the same programs that you're benefiting from, right? Like, take a look in the mirror, buddy.
yeah. Well, and it's really interesting. So I guess like the bottom line to both of their campaigns, we can see that because you bring up language.
Yeah.
So Carney's slogan is Canada Strong, which like presents unity and, working together and blah, 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 like growing Canada. Whereas Poilievre's slogan is Canada First. And I don't know who in their right mind in the Conservative Party thought that Canada First, which mirrors, I don't know, where have we heard this before? America First was a smart way to go into this election campaign.
Yeah. Like it comes across as
that's very isolationist and very like Trump mirroring when your opponent is literally Trump.
Yeah. Like it comes across as pretty tone deaf, right? Because just one of the things was, well, work down there. Why want to work up here?
Unless you're a conservative strategist listening, in which case it's a great idea and you should keep going with that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Keep going. Align yourself more with Trump. Like, trust me, it'll pay out.
And tell Danielle Smith to keep talking.
Yeah.
Do you have any last minute comments about the Conservatives or the Liberals?
Yeah, because I wanted to mention this because I was kind of thinking about it a little bit. And like a lot of Poilievre's platform does also boil down like cutting taxes and spending at the same time. And a lot of what I've seen so far, that does not work, right? Because we're in the middle of like, an affordability crisis, inflation, someone threatening to annex our country. And you want to increase our military spending to 2% NATO target. And then you want to try and like, at the same time, cut money coming in and how much you're spending on other programs, right? And like, you can't do that and be successful. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You really have to choose like, okay, we're either gonna be spending, and yeah, we're gonna have to like, have to put a little bit more money into the economy to keep it afloat, or we're gonna be cutting. You can't do both. So yeah, it's a really
and it's interesting you bring that up because I think it's also important to look at Mark Carney on this.
Yeah.
Because he sucks here too. And that's because I don't know if you watched any of his stuff this week, but reporters were really at him for this because they were like, okay, so you want to, because his big thing is like invest in infrastructure, invest in Canada, but he also wants to cut taxes and blah, 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 right? And increase NATO spending and make concessions to Trump in a like mutually beneficial way.
Yeah.
And so reporters were like, okay, so are you going to run a deficit? And his answer to this was, well, no, because I'm going to encourage the private sector to invest in the economy. And his plan is to somehow get like a dollar for dollar matching so that while he's cutting government spending, it'll be made up by the private sector.
Yeah.
But the thing is he won't answer how he's going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think this is something, because the media's picked up on this, and so they're going after him about that, and they're going after him about his assets. Although they seem to have like kind of moved on from the asset thing. But I would like to know from Carney, and like to be clear, I guess this is like the gamble he's making. I still personally think that Poilievre is too dangerous to win. So my vote will still be going to Carney, even though it doesn't matter in my riding because that conservative guy is going to win by like 70%, which is actually down. I think he's going to lose votes based on what I've seen on his Facebook page and stuff because people are mad at him. But the point is, he's taking a gamble being like, well, this isn't important enough. Like, this isn't the issue anyway. Yeah. But I would like to know, okay, well, how are you going to encourage this investment? Like, what kind of profit concessions are you going to make? Like, are you going to say, we're going to put in X amount of money and you can profit off of this in this way if you match us here?
Yeah. Or is it going to be like a bunch of public-private partnerships, right?
Yeah, like what is your plan here? And then how, I guess then the Canadian public has to look at it and say, okay, well, like, is that going to work? And if I don't think it's going to work, is that still worth voting for Carney? My analysis of that is hell yes. Poilievre's crazy. Yeah. But that doesn't mean I don't want to know. And it doesn't mean that I'm not skeptical. Like I can, if the polls play out, and we'll talk about the polls in a minute, but if the polls play out the way they do, like, yay, we kept Poilievre out. But I guarantee you within like a month, you and I will be sitting here and being like, okay, let's now criticize Carney on like all this other shit that he's doing that's stupid and very conservative. Like,
yeah. You know, the way politics is supposed to be. It's almost as if you're not supposed to pick sides like it's a fucking team sport. Anyway, on the topic of picking sides, let's take a minute to shit on Jagmeet Singh.
Yes. Oh my God. You go first, because I know you have some like opinions.
Well, I have a lot of opinions on Jagmeet Singh. The first one being that I think he just needs to resign from leadership. Like,
I can see that in your notes.
Yeah, and okay, so quick introduction to his policy proposals. This includes a tax relief plan for the GST and essential items to address cost of living.
What was GST? I didn't see it. Is he going to cut that more?
No, he wants to cut the GST completely from any sort of like food and essential items. And I was like,
oh, okay.
I was like, wow, stupid policy. Like,
you know, I mean, it's stupid policy in terms of like revenue.
Yeah. But like, okay, but here's my thing. Like, we already had the GST break, right? We had the GST break between December 14 and February 14. And like, fun fact, for a little bit after, because our Costco bills for a little bit did not have GST on it still. So like, thanks Costco for saving us, I guess, $20. But
well,
anyway,
a lot of food's already exempt.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. Like, a lot of food is already exempt. A lot of like, I think it's kind of focusing more on those like other essential items, right? So I'm guessing he's thinking like toilet paper and like sanitary products kind of deal, right?
Yeah. Which you're gonna get a woman's perspective on this in a minute. So tread lightly.
Yeah. And like, so like, on the one hand, I get it. Like, it's one of those policies. It's like, yeah, you know what? You're basically just like, you're making those things a bit more affordable. But on the other hand, to me, I'm like, well, in the whole course of the GST break, I saved maybe $50. Like,
yeah, that's being over like a month.
Yeah, but that's being
extrapolate that like over 20 years.
I mean, so what? $600 a month or $600 a year for 20 years? Like, $600 isn't. You know, I'm not gonna turn my nose up at it. I love $600.
But think about like the single mom who has like, say, 3 girls that all go through puberty at the same time and is still for some reason having to pay GST for like 5 years on all their sanitary products.
Yeah.
So like I'm actually fine with that. Because like, and we talked about this with the tax breaks from the other two, right? Where $900 a year to me, because I'm very lucky in my status, is a new switch.
Yeah.
But for like a lot of people, that's like 3 grocery bills to feed their family.
Yeah. And I mean, that is fair. But at the same time, the other part of it to me is that like we've gone from a world where bread was $2 pre-COVID to where it's now a loaf of bread is $5 post-COVID, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I told you the breakdown I did for how much it cost me to bake bread at home, but the answer is that it comes down to like 72 cents or something like that, as opposed to going to the store and buying a loaf of bread. So like, it's one of those things, but I have to spend the time and like I have to invest the time and effort into baking the bread myself, which is like, don't get me wrong, I love it, but it's still a pain to do every week.
Yeah,
So,
my
like,
mother-in-law bakes like 4 loaves at a time and then freezes some.
Oh, I should start doing that. I've just been doing 1 a week.
Yeah, he like does like 4 at a time and then does like monthly.
Okay, that's smart. I want to start doing that idea. I have to go buy.
Rumors are good for something.
Yeah.
He listens to this podcast too, so he's probably going to be laughing right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir, for the idea of baking more bread at the same time. Because I definitely did not think about that the first time. So,
the next time I see him, he's going to be like, who is this person?
anyway, so that's kind of everything that's kind of come from Jagmeet Singh and his campaign. And like,
but then how do you compensate for that? That's the other side of that, right? Like, are we going to run higher deficits, which means when you lose power, taxes go up?
Yeah.
Because they're not going to raise, like, they're not going to put GST back on those items. And we saw that with like Harper, right? Like he lowered the GST to 5%, but then, and a lot of people don't know this, he used tariffs to make up the revenue. On what did he put tariffs on? Hockey equipment from the US. Brilliant man. Because a lot of people don't know this, and I don't know why I know this, a lot of hockey equipment is manufactured south of the border.
Yeah.
So like, I thought that was hilarious when I saw that happen during the Harper era, because it didn't really, like, most Canadian families have a kid in hockey if they have boys.
Yeah.
Less so like girls, although that's kind of coming around. So like there's always some scheme to compensate.
Yeah.
You're going to be paying more somewhere, right?
Yeah. So like not
that I think that's an excuse, but
seeing Jagmeet Singh's platform it's not inspiring much confidence. But I also will say that he said that as long as he's leader of the NDP, he'll always stand against the Polyev government, which kind of sounded to me like he will plan to stay on after the election, which like I don't think it's helping the NDP at this point, right?
No, and under normal circumstances, he would definitely be, and I don't want to get too much into polls because that's our next topic, but like he would be under leadership review immediately because they're like about to get trashed.
Yep.
But they're about to get trashed because people are running an ABC election right now. And so I think he could get away with staying on because he can be like, well, it's not my fault. Our voters needed to keep Polyev out.
Yeah. Like, so that's probably why he'll stay on. But at the same time, like, I think him being leader, like over the last few years, like when he first started, I was like, okay, I'll give him a fair shot. But then like, as time has gone on, I'm like, I just kind of wish Mulcair would come back. That's just where I'm at. I'm like, give me Tom Mulcair, like a dude who's like kind of boring, but just like, his policy just kind of made a bit more sense to me because I feel like the NDP is trying to differentiate itself too much from the CPC and the Liberals by being like, no, we're the left option, right? And like, as someone who would normally vote NDP, being like, no, like this time I'm just voting, like I'm probably voting Liberal. Like there's definitely no way I'm voting Conservative. But like I'm not throwing my vote on the Green Party.
You don't want to vote for like uber religious, can't say anything else than Polyev's talking points MP?
I actually have a new one apparently because like I'm seeing new like signs in my neighborhood. So So I'm guessing the districts got redrawn.
They must have. Interesting.
Yeah.
That one's probably not any better.
Yeah, I know. Like, just kind of like based on walking through the neighborhood the other day, I was like, ugh, cool.
I want to put a Carney sign up, but I think my house will get vandalized.
Yeah, I definitely had a thought of putting up one of those like anything but conservative signs. And then I was like, no, I have a feeling that like someone on the street's gonna fucking throw a brick through my window. So
Maybe they'll just egg your house.
yeah.
So one last point that I have on this, and it's not really a point so much as like just an additional development that happened this week. Canada froze $43 million in Tesla rebates this week amongst trade tensions. So that made me laugh because fuck Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't have anything else to say about the NDP, I don't want to write them off, but like...
Well, and that's the thing. I don't want to write them off because like normally I would vote NDP. I vote NDP in every Alberta election.
Yeah, but like having NDP in the Alberta election is different because they're the official opposition.
I know, but like, it's like,
and they're not really NDP. They're like the Liberals.
Yeah, it's just one of those things though where it's like, man, I wish I could give you my vote more confidently, but I can't, right? And like things are just so crazy right now that like if I did, I feel like I'd be betraying my country. So that's where I'm at. So
speaking of country betrayal,
yep.
I'll put this up while we talk about it. Danielle Smith. She gave an interview to Breitbart this week. Let me just move down here. Okay, I'll put that up. So I'm curious as to what you think about this. So basically, March 8th has caught up to her, which is like kind of funny because now we're at like March 29th today, 30th. So she's been criticized for giving this March 8th interview with the US right-wing based outlet Breitbart, which for those of you that don't know is like basically Steve Bannon's Steve, that's his name, right?
Yeah, Steve Bannon's personal soapbox.
Yeah. News outlet or whatever. So there was a few things here that came out of this. So like here's the like quote in the article that's kind of up. But I'm gonna read this out for people and then we can talk about it. So she was asked about tariffs and she said, let's just put things on pause until after the election, Smith said, referring to potential Trump-imposed tariffs on Canadian products. If you hit us with tariffs now, you'll just help the Liberals. Nobody wants that. Yep. The nobody wants that part is what critics are pointing to as like crossing a serious line here and implying a request for U.S. policy decisions to shape Canada's election outcome.
Yep.
And then she goes on to say, before the tariff war, actually, let me just see. There we go. Before the tariff war, I would say yes. I mean, Pierre Poilievre is the name of the Conservative Party leader, and he was miles ahead of Justin Trudeau. But because of what we see as unjust and unfair tariffs, it's actually caused an increase in the support for the Liberals. And so that's what I fear, is that the longer this dispute goes on, politicians posture, and it seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now. So I would hope that we could put things on pause, is what I've told administration officials. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election. Okay, so aside from like the obvious here, what I find really interesting is that she thinks that like the tariffs have caused conservative voters to go over to Carney. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is, yes, Trump's like for sure playing a role in this, but like people are literally looking at Poilievre and going, you are Trump. And this is like people from the left, right? So like NDP voters who are just like, no, we can't vote NDP and let you win.
Yep. Like
if we look at Harper and Jack Layton actually basically got together and like worked together to destroy the Liberal parties when Jack Layton became the official opposition, because those two people were smart. Yeah. Poilievre doesn't work with anyone. Yeah. So what we've seen is, yes, the Conservatives' support has gone down a little bit, But if we look close at the polls and like questions that pollsters are asking, what's actually happened is centrists who hated Justin Trudeau put up with Polyev.
Yep.
But as soon as Trudeau stepped down, like they were already flocking back before Carney was even the leader. And then more of them flocked back when the polls were showing that Carney was going to win that leadership.
Yeah.
So that I think is the first thing there.
Yeah, like a lot of it does come from the fact that just like people just hated Trudeau towards the end of his term, right? And like, literally just on 338 right now, you can see Trudeau resigns and all of a sudden there's an uptick. And like there's an uptick in the Liberals and a drop in the Conservatives. Like, it wasn't that people were like, it's not that these tariffs are like the only factor here. They're definitely contributing, don't get me wrong. But people just hated Trudeau. And as soon as they're like, oh, there's a new option, new sheriff in town, he's not going to stand for election. Boom. Now we have an alternative that we actually feel comfortable in. And like, I saw something this morning on CBC again that was like, people are kind of concerned that Mark Carney's never held public office before, but at the same time, they're all like, everyone on this team is explaining like, well, Governor of Bank of Canada, Governor of the Bank of England, like an experienced and established economist. Like,
I think that that's not an everybody thing. I think that's Canadian media.
Yeah, that's definitely a Canadian thing. Like
so no, but a media thing, right? Like,
yeah.
like a Canadian political beat media thing. Because the only people I hear talking about that are like David from Power and Politics, Rosemary Barton, like reporters. Chantel, what's her name? Chantel something. She's a Quebec reporter. Peter Manfred, like all of these like people that have been around forever. Like, but he's never like, but that's what people like about him.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. Like, yeah, well, that's also why Trump won. He came in as an outsider, and like you have Mark Carney now coming in as a political outsider to like basically be the new sheriff in town, if polls are to be believed, right? And like people like that because people are also tired of like career politicians.
Well, and it's interesting. The other thing people don't like about Carney, well, the other thing the media doesn't like about Carney, and it's kind of irritated me. I don't know how much you've watched of him, but like he gets really short with the media.
Yeah.
I've
seen a few.
There's a lot more parallels between him and Polyev there. Like, and you can see that in like if you've ever followed his like Governor of England, Bank of England stuff, the English media hated him as well because he was kind of the same. And I noticed, and this might hurt him a little bit in Quebec, and he's going to need to be careful about this. When he gets asked a question in French, there's two components there. One, I don't think he fully understands the question because his French sucks. Yep. And two, he gets like flustered and annoyed really easily. So in his last press conference, CBC had like the translators on. And when he got asked, like he got pressed again about the assets for like the third time in that conference. Yeah. And in French, he was like, enough. And I was like, holy shit, you need to pull it back. Like he just like was like, fuck off, reporter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of.
Yeah, and it's definitely a weak point of his too, right? Because he does get so short and like testy with reporters, and he really does have to pull it back. And someone from his team has probably told him, like, look, dude, you gotta calm the fuck down.
Well, and it's mostly just like don't get me wrong, like I think he needs to treat everybody with respect. Yep. And so like stop being a douchebag.
Yep.
But I think in terms of like the Canadian public, most Canadian public are fine with that. Like, do we remember the apple eating video of Polyev? Nobody gave a crap about that.
Yeah.
Where it's gonna matter is Quebec, because Quebec sees their media as the ones fighting for them and their sovereignty.
Yeah. And especially considering like, and we have two official languages, right?
Yeah.
Like that's an important thing to do. And again, je parle très mal français, right? Like my French is god awful. But like even I understand like, no, it's important to try and learn. Like it's the country we live in.
If you're going to lead the country with two languages, you need to speak both of them.
Exactly. And like, I was actually talking to my girlfriend about this the other day because we were talking about like, well, we can't go anywhere like outside of the country. We can't really go to the States for like a trip. Where should we go? And I was like, well, why don't we go to Halifax? Like, it's somewhere interesting. Like, you've never been. You can like, we can see the legislature, the Citadel, the Halifax explosion stuff, all that kind of stuff. And like, the caveat to that is like a lot of the region does speak French because they're right next door to Quebec, right?
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah, so I was like, but that's what also makes it interesting because like for I don't know what 25 years of my life, I'd basically not engaged with Eastern Canada at all until I went there like for a conference, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, French Canadians. And then there was another time we were in Vancouver on the ferry, and again another French Canadian family was there, and they were just they were getting breakfast, and then they were speaking French. I was like, oh yeah, that's right, we live in Canada. There's two languages, right? Like, it's just one of those things where like I never thought about it until I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's important to have that. So, not just I'm lost in Quebec, I need to talk to somebody kind of thing, but also just like in general, like, no, it's a point of national pride too.
Yeah. Well, and so like, yeah, so going back, like, I think he'll be fine but only because like the Conservatives are running such a horrible campaign and Danielle Smith won't shut up.
Yep.
So here's another doozy that she said, and I'm sure Polyev was like, please, for the love of God, stop talking. She said, so I would think that there's probably still always going to be areas that are skirmishes or disputes about particular industries when it comes to the border. But I would say, on balance, the perspective that Pierre would bring would be very much in sync with, I think, the new direction in America, she added. And I think we'd have a really great relationship for the period of time they're both in. Did you catch what I caught?
I mean, the in sync for the period of time they're both in, yeah. I mean, that's pretty obvious too, where it's like, hey, we're both like, we're pretty aligned on these things, right? And that's also where Pierre Poilievre's having a problem because like he's so Trump aligned, and people are like, they're looking at Trump and they're being like, nope, like especially here in Canada, right?
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to ask you, like, what is your thought? Like, do you think she's actually like? So don't get me wrong, I hate Danielle Smith. I think she needs to go away. She's been involved in like, she's a liar. There's like the healthcare stuff, which I know you can't talk about, but like, that's insane. All of that contract stuff that's going on, and the fact that she hasn't made our health minister step down. Yeah. Going to the US, like showing up at with like really prominent right-wing supportive of dictatorship leaders within that party. And now we have this. And I guess I've just gone back and forth on like, okay, I get that this is all problematic and whatever, but like, is she really like, I guess where I struggle is I don't know that she's really like advocating for like a foreign government to like interfere directly in our elections, because number one, that already happens, but number two, like we're so integrated with the US that like this is a thing. And then like finally number three, which isn't really a point, but like nobody's stupid. If Trump comes out tomorrow and is like, oh, tariffs are gone, like we know in a month they're just going to be back again. Like I don't think it's going to change the direction of this. But then on the other hand, you still have a leader that's like reaching out to a foreign government and saying like, hey, we need to keep the liberals out.
Yep.
So like, I don't know. I go back and forth on this like hourly.
So my perspective on it is like, yes, like I'm absolutely on side with the whole like, it's her job, it's her job to do these things. But at the same time, like there's a difference between having a conversation with an administration official and a difference between going to Breitbart and saying the type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it too is also just that asking someone to change their policy specifically to benefit your party, that counts. Because like
but
if
it's
I want
also a thing.
I mean, yeah, it is a thing. But
that's literally how Canada and the US works.
It's a thing, and like I get that, but you're doing it in like a really politically charged and turbulent time, and that's kind of where a lot of this is coming from.
Yeah.
And for me, that like we're going to talk more about this later, like literally right after this, where we're talking Pierre Poilievre and national security, and like election interference, that kind of stuff. But having that like specifically going and be like, hey, can you just like stop this because like we're seeing a surge in liberal polls, that's what comes across as, she's asking for like foreign interference in our election, right?
Yeah.
And for me, that's what I see, because I'm like, I have literally spent the last 2 years just taking courses on like international and global politics, and like I see that kind of thing. I'm like, ew, like, yikes,
I guess for me, I'm just like, I'm so exhausted that like whenever I see her do something, I'm like, yeah, that checks out. It's like, we'll talk later about the whole like Trump disappearing people, but I was like, yeah, I warned people about this 2.5 months ago.
Yeah, and like that's a totally fair perspective, right? It's easy to get especially now, it's easy to get exhausted by just how bad the news is. And like straight up doing this podcast has definitely affected my mental health. But like at the same time, like this is what I find interesting and I'm passionate in, is like these kinds of like political and like international issues. And then when we have our premier, like in the province that we live in, doing this kind of thing, claiming that she's representing Alberta to Breitbart, right? Like if she had the conversation and there was like a press release from like the Alberta government, different story. But the fact that we heard about it in a roundabout way because of Breitbart, that's what really made me like super angry at her, because I was like, no, you can't just keep going around behind our backs as like your citizens and constituents, pretending that you're representing us, but you're going to these like right-wing media outlets that aren't just Breitbart, but also Ben Shapiro. And like
that's who I was trying to think of, Shapiro.
Yeah. So like we have like all of this, like you have all of this in the middle of like a really politically charged time. And like as an Albertan, I'm like, no, you know what? Like, and to be fair, I am an NDP member. So like I'm already like pretty anti Danielle Smith. But like,
yeah, but you only got that membership to vote for Nenshi.
Yeah, I got that specifically to vote for Nenshi. Like by the time Rachel Notley was done, I was kind of like, okay.
You and like 40,000 other Albertans.
Yeah, refresh the party. And then she came in and I was like, all right, that's our man. Let's fucking go. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I see, right? And then if we're okay to transition to the next one, because we're going to start talking about election interference. Yeah, because let's talk a little bit about election interference. Like recent reports have surfaced alleging that the Indian government has interfered in the 2022 Conservative Party leadership race. Nick, you want to pull up the video?
Yeah. Okay, so let's we'll watch the first couple minutes of this. We won't watch all of it, but it'll kind of give us a quick
News Network. Defense spending, housing costs, a GST break for new home buyers, all are among the pledges today from party leaders out on the campaign trail. We'll tell you about those in a moment, but we want to begin with a topic all the leaders are being asked about today. It has to do with allegations of election interference involving the Conservative leadership race in 2022. Our colleagues at Radio Canada report that Canada's spy agency, CSIS, learned that agents in India organized to bolster Pierre Poilievre's election campaign. Here's how party leaders are reacting.
I find it downright irresponsible that the leader of the opposition, day after day, month after month, year after year, refuses to obtain his security clearance.
And the fact is, Pierre Poilievre could get to the answer of that right now. You could get security, could have months ago, could have years ago, got security clearance and found out what's going on.
The behavior of both the Liberals and the Conservatives regarding foreign intrusions is like leaving for vacations, leaving the garage door open. Anybody gets in and does whatever they want.
Let's be honest. I won the leadership fair and square. Even my political competitors, like Mr. Patrick Brown, have publicly testified under oath that that was the case.
The CBC's Karina Roman joins.
Okay, I just want to say, like, if you have to, like, be like, oh, he testified under oath about this is the case. Yeah, it really comes to me, you're a politician. I'm not going to trust a single word you say. So, like, I'm already severely doubting that, right? But, okay, a lot of this problem does stem from the fact that since he's become leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre has refused to get a security clearance. So he can't be read in on any sort of, like, actual intelligence or, like, national security things. And these, according to a source with top secret clearance cited by the Globe and Mail, CSIS discovered that these agents were involved in fundraising and organizing support within the South Asian community for Poilievre during the leadership contest. And The CSIS assessment indicated also, however, sorry, I'm way ahead of myself.
It's okay.
However, the CSIS assessment indicated that this involvement was neither extensive nor highly coordinated, and there's no evidence suggesting that Polyev or his inner circle were aware of these activities. So in response, Pierre Polyev, like we just saw, claimed that he won fair and square, referencing public testimonies. And this kind of re-sparked the discussion of like, well, why aren't you getting your security clearance?
So you could have known.
Yeah, and it's literally just so we could have known, because this is something that they've been talking about for a long time as well. Because prior to this, like even under the Trudeau government, we were talking about election interference and CSIS having like this intelligence in these reports. And like, if you're in the House of Commons, or I would say the Senate, but the Senate is basically just like, it's just a bunch of old dudes sitting around at this point. They don't really do any work. So
Not since the 1988.
yeah, not since 1988, which is why I keep joking about like, man, I should just become a senator. Easy life, own $4,000 of property, and then just like fuck off to Ottawa. Love it. Anyway, like the reason why we have these intelligence reports and security clearances is so you can read these things and actually be informed about the issue. Now, Polyev has always said that he doesn't want to get it because it restricts him from talking about these things. But former CSIS director Ward Elcock criticized the stance as just silly because, and he's right, it's like objectively false. Like being read in does not mean that you can't talk about it. It just means you have to watch what you say about it, right? Like it's still secret intelligence, and that's the entire point of CSIS.
Yeah, but then he wouldn't be able to have his "they're trying to silence me" rhetoric, because I see that every day from Albertans. They're like, "Oh, it's fine. He just doesn't want to be silenced." Like, on what planet are you from? Because when Harper was opposition leader, you bet your ass he had a security clearance. Why? Because it's important for leaders of parties to be informed so they can make proper policy decisions about where their parties stand based on threats to Canada.
Yeah, like you need to be read in on these things. And like on the campaign trail, he's been saying too, is like, well, I don't need to get it again because I've gotten it before. And like
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago, by the way. So I was in grade school at the time. And like he's calling this an attack by the liberals while Carney holds secret meetings with China, right? And like, all I could find on the Carney and China connection was like a very
He's
very
lying.
it was a very like loose, and like it's a very like what was it? It was called the Bureau, and it was like a guy, and it was written by a guy with a very huge anti-China slant. Like his Wikipedia page even points it out. So like, not exactly the most credible source, but that's literally the only connection I could find. So, and like, how do you consider that against the fact that we also have like foreign intelligence and espionage agencies actively working in Canada? And we were talking about this before we hopped on about like how the Indian government had Hardeep Singh Nijjar was like literally assassinated on Canadian soil, and like now we have like elements organizing within political party leadership races, right?
Well,
so, like,
and we have a global shift in alliances. It's probably pretty important for you to get your security clearance so that we can, you can look at maybe what's going on in the US and Trump and Russia and China. Because we literally have a US government that's like, you know what? You know who's our friend now? Russia.
Yeah. And that's where you have the problem too of like BRICS, BRICS being a thing, very interesting because like they're supposed to be this like, cooperative bloc, but they're very like, they very clearly still fight against each other in a lot of ways, because you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then you have Russia. And Russia is kind of like off doing its own little thing. China is focusing so hard on Taiwan and like Asia, right? And like you have this like group that's trying to organize specifically to counter America and NATO in a way. Like maybe not
trying to counter the rest of NATO.
Exactly. And like, what has made the world so successful, Western world, I should specify, so successful, is NATO and like that kind of like economic cooperation and that kind of like intelligence sharing, because that's also where you get the Five Eyes. And like,
who, by the way, should be cutting the US off.
Oh yeah, and there are already talks about that, right? Where the Five Eyes agencies have to kind of start looking out for themselves. And like,
wonder if those talks picked up this week.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if like all 5 of them suddenly had a phone call of like, "Hey, so CIA, we're not sharing with you anymore. Like, clearly
Yeah.
you can't talk to your president, right?" And like,
your Secretary of Defense cannot be trusted.
yeah, your Secretary of Defense is actually using fucking Signal to send messages on like classified war plans. A plus management.
Not classified. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But
But yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of it boils down to. So, me as like a major international global politics nerd and someone who like loves this stuff, I see it as like, okay, well, you're actively choosing to be ignorant of the world and what's happening in it, right? And like, I guess my question for you then is like, what do you see that? And like, how do you see, someone who has been basically ignorant of all these problems we've been having in the world because of espionage over the last like 5-10 years, how do you see someone who's basically been ignorant of that like working to resolve that if they're not read in, right?
that is like the perfect segue, because I can tell you how Canadians are seeing this.
Yep.
This is insane. And let's preface this by saying, like, polls aren't always right. So make sure you still go out and vote. But this is how Canadians are seeing that. There has been a slight shift. Right now, the Liberals look poised to take 190 seats. This is like the biggest fuck up, I think, in Canadian history. I don't remember a time, and I know Peter Mansbridge, who is like, for our American listeners, is like the oldest Canadian reporter ever. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like, he's an old guy.
He's old.
He was like, I've never seen this before. Like, Polyev has lost like a 25-point lead and tanked just based on the Trump factor. So if we look at this, like Ontario and Quebec, you ain't winning shit if you don't have these 2 provinces.
Yep.
And there's now, like, look at this spread. There's like a 15-point spread between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And like, the NDP is just getting decimated. And here's what's really interesting. So this doesn't matter for this election, but it could for the next one. So the leadership debate is run by like the Leadership Commission, and they require that you meet 2 out of 3 requirements to be able to actually participate in that debate.
Yeah.
And that's either you have 9%, you have to have 9% of the electorate, you have to have a sitting MP in the House, and then there's one other one. What is it? And 90% of your candidates registered for the election. So the NDP have like just hit that threshold because they're at 9%.
Yep.
And it has to be within 28 days of the election. So on Friday they were at 9%, and Friday was the deadline. So like they're getting in by like the
skin of their teeth.
And the Bloc, I don't think they made the cut, but sometimes they make exceptions for the Bloc because of the whole like sovereignty thing.
Yeah.
But these polls are insane. Like, I've never seen anything like this in Canada before.
I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen like such a huge.
Yeah, well, you're a baby, so.
I know, I'm still younger, I should say, but like I've never seen anything like this. And even as someone who's just kind of like gone through and like literally read Wikipedia pages on past elections, it's really weird to see like, Pierre Poilievre shit the bed on behalf of the Conservatives. Way to fumble a 25% lead, bud.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Even the CBC poll tracker, which is they take all of the polls and put them together and then average them, and then like they weight based, like, so older polls are weighted less, but even they have the Liberals at 41% and the Conservatives at 37%. It's a big deal. And right now we are looking towards a majority Liberal win. Yeah. But again, don't like don't take that for granted. Vote, people.
Anything can happen in the next 29 days, right? Like,
Yeah, right. So, but like the bottom line is that basically the Liberals have a red wave and the NDP is vanishing faster than Blockbuster Video did after Netflix. So, yeah, they need to like figure their shit out, because if somebody like as boring as Mark Carney is winning this badly, like.
Although I also want to mention, people want boring right now. Right?
Oh, 100%.
And like,
especially with what's happening. And like, yeah, 100%. It's just,
it's
that's
just
not
really
how
funny.
politics works usually.
Yeah. Also, this is just something else that's kind of funny. I saw a 22-minute segment about like Mark Carney is like literally the most boring dude to run for office in the last like 30 years. And everyone's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm into it.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Let's move on to the crazy shit happening in the US.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Signal. This was like hilarious to me. Like don't get me wrong, super serious. Cannot believe, yes, I can totally believe this happened with Trump. But like, okay, so let's back up. March 11th, Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, received a request for a Signal connection by Michael Waltz, who is the national security advisor in the US. He accepted because, of course, he did. And this wouldn't have been out of the ordinary either. Jeffrey Goldberg is a national security investigative journalist. Yep. So he's also like the worst person that they could have. Well, okay, depending on your perspective. So worst person in the sense of like reporters that know what they're doing. Yep. Best person in the sense that like they're really, really lucky that he knew what he was doing and was like, holy shit, and kept his mouth shut.
Yep.
Because otherwise they could have been mourning US military pilots. Which we'll get to that in a second because there's other shit that happened in here. So anyway, Michael Waltz added Jeffrey Goldberg to this Signal thread, which was discussing a military strike in Yemen. Yep. So before we go on, what I actually want to do, because I think this is important, and I will link in the description for audio listeners too, a link to that isn't behind a paywall where they can like physically see these screenshots, because BBC published them. And I also think it's important to know that Jeffrey Goldberg sat on these for a while. He didn't actually release these until Wednesday, after the Trump administration was like, they had like lied and said that like none of what Jeff Goldberg was saying was true, and like they didn't discuss attack plans or anything like that. Yeah. So then I guess The Atlantic was like, okay, fuck you. And they released a redacted version of these text messages. In terms of what was safe. So like anything that was already passed, there is one thing that Jeff Goldberg said that was in here that he didn't release. And it was that Michael Waltz named a CIA operative in this text chain. Oh, you didn't hear about this. I didn't
hear about that, but A+ idiocy right there. Right?
Yeah. So he like named an active CIA operative in this chain. Goldberg obviously did not release the name of the person.
Yeah, because you want to save your asset, even though he's probably already dead.
Yeah, because as we'll talk about later, hilariously, last month, the CIA released a report about how Russia has found a way to hack Signal's end-to-end encryption. Yeah. And Waltz was in fucking Russia when all of this was like taking place. And Tulsi was in like South Asia or some shit. And you can't get, according to national security investigative journalists, Pete Buttigieg, and other like government officials, you can't download Signal onto government secured phones. So What phones were they on?
Yeah.
And was it, I think it was the Bulwark that realized in reading through these texts that Marco Rubio was added twice, presumably because he was on an unsecured personal phone and was like, oh shit, and like switched phones, which I thought was quite interesting. So let me just like read, we won't read all of them because there's like 15 screenshots, but let's just like set the stage here. So on March 9th, this Houthi, okay, this was the other thing. They called it Houthi PC small group. So PC is like a term they use in the White House for these secured groups. So he like also put the targets like in the fucking name, idiots. There's 19 people in this group. So in this group was Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, JD Vance, the Vice President, Michael Waltz, National Security Advisor, John Ratcliffe, CIA Director. Actually, I think Ratcliffe might have been the one in Russia. It was one of these two. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, Susie Wilds, White House Chief of Staff, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Stephen Miller. This one hasn't been confirmed, but that's who they're thinking the SM was. Joe Kent, nominee for National Counterterrorism Center, Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, and Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary. So, Michael Waltz sent at 4:28 p.m. Team establishing a principals group for coordination on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a Tiger team at deputies, agencies, chief of staff level, following up from the meeting in the sit room this morning for action items, and will be sending that out later this evening. Please provide the best staff POC from your team for us to coordinate with over the weekend. So then everybody goes on to like list people, which is how they like kind of figured out who was in here, right? So like we can see Joe Kent, etc. Yeah, they're fucking morons. So this is more just like housekeeping, whatever. Here's something really funny that I'm sure Vance nor Trump was really happy about coming out. JD Vance writes, team, I'm out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, because who needs to deal with national security when you're out doing an event?
Right.
But I think we are making a mistake. 3% of US trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There's a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this is, as Poitis said, to send a message. But I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we will see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, but there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc. So this is quite interesting because it means that JD Vance is basically like hating Europe in private and public. So like at least he's consistent, but yeah. Europe was pissed about this. And can I also just say, as like a side note, and if anybody's interested, I wrote a really long piece on this week that's up on our website. But like, is anybody else just sick and tired of hearing the US whine and complain about how they're like in charge of global security when like literally they were the ones after World War II that was like, we don't want any of you to have nukes. We will run world security, which also was like super beneficial to them. So like, shut the fuck up, America.
Yeah. Like
gets my blood boiling.
You're complaining about the fact that you get to control the world, like, and you know, we all get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Like you're complaining about the fact that like you built this system specifically to control global security against communism, and now you're like,
to your benefit.
Yeah, to your benefit, by the way. Like you have access to every single market in the world,
making
like,
your currency the reserve currency.
Yeah, of the entire fucking planet after you moved away from the gold standard. Like it's like World Bank, IMF, like every Bretton Woods institution is based in the States. The like United Nations based in the States. Like all of these global security things based in the States, and you're complaining about having all of them based in the States. Like, also, I just want to mention that it really pisses me off that like somehow JD Vance is like the voice of reason in this group. Like, And like that fucking pisses me off.
I know, right? So like, and on that note, so they kind of like, I'm not going to read all this part, but like they go back and forth, and basically all these different people are like, yeah, like I'm fine if we had to wait a few weeks or whatever. And like at one point, Pete Hegseth here like addresses him directly and says that he understands their concerns and like supports this, blah, blah, blah. I think messaging is going to be a tough no matter what. No, this part was really telling. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, which is why we would need to stay focused on 1, Biden failed, 2, Iran funded. Which like he's not wrong. Like
Yeah,
that's like a little insight into politics. Then he like talks about the risks of waiting, like, which is hilarious because he's the one, as you can see right here. Can you see my little pointer? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So right here he says, "This leaks and we look indecisive."
I mean, it leaked.
This
and-
this is going to be important for like 2 seconds later.
Yeah.
So he said like we're prepared to execute blah blah blah. And now at this point, Jeff Goldberg, and I will post a bunch of different things in the description for people if they want to go through. Like Jeff Goldberg gave a really great interview, a full interview on this. I think it was like a half hour with the Bulwark this week, and like they really dove right into like what happened and how he was feeling. And one of the things he said was like, I thought, like, we all thought this was a hoax at the Atlantic, that somebody was like pulling our chain and fucking with us.
Yeah.
Until the bombs actually dropped, which we'll get to. So then like blah, blah, blah. And then he's like enforce OPSEC, which is Operation Security, which also hilarious. More kind of chit chat, blah, 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 still talking about if they should go. Pete Hegseth like talks about European freeloading, which really pissed off the Europeans more. Okay, so before we go on to that, I want to play, this is going to be important. We are going to play 2 things. We're going to play Hegseth on Signal, and then we're going to watch Waltz blame Goldberg. Both of these are going to be important for like the rest of the texting. Rio, if you can't hear this too, like,
Give you a shout. I got you.
yeah, let me
Also,
know.
I just want to mention real quick because I wanted to check who it was in Moscow. It was Steve Witkoff, the Ukraine and Middle East envoy of Trump. So this dude was in Moscow on this Signal chat. When Moscow was like, "Yep, we managed to hack through this." Like, A+.
Fucking Christ.
Fucking idiots.
So I pulled this clip from Pod Save America. They're freaking awesome. I love them. Everybody knows that by now about me. I will post a link again to this full pod as well, because they have like a really good like 20-minute segment on this. They're great people to watch in general if you're interested in American politics. These guys were all former speechwriters for Obama. So they're all like White House former staff, like quite interesting characters. The guy you see on screen right now, hilariously enough, is a libertarian. So it's really funny hearing like his notes on this. But this one is Hegseth, I think.
In Hawaii. You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the
lies,
the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is a guy that peddles in garbage. It's what he does. I've heard it was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Right, thank you.
You like literally.
I just want to mention real quick, Pete Hegseth is like clearly just like such a fucking tech bro. Like, like, can you not fucking move your goddamn jaw when you're?
Remember what he said. Nobody was texting war plans.
Oh yeah, like, good point. I'm really mad at the way he just speaks. It annoys me. So
No, totally. Okay, so I'm just going to take this opportunity before we go on to play this, because I also think it's kind of important. So this is the National Security Advisor. He's the one that fucked up He's the one that added Goldberg. Now he's trying to peddle on Fox News that Goldberg like hacked the signal thing and like did all of this on purpose, which like, okay. But we'll watch. It took me a minute to find play. There we go.
I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never
No.
talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone?
National Security Advisor Mike Waltz appeared on Fox News in an attempt to explain.
Okay, it's also important to know, for those of you that don't have to suffer through Fox News, when Laura Ingraham is like looking at you like you're insane, things are bad.
And how he inadvertently included the Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg to a Signal group chat discussing U.S. war plans.
I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in,
you that.
it gets
contact.
sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was
So
on
the person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
Who
guy.
was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Despite saying he takes, quote, full responsibility, Waltz continued to disparage the Atlantic and Goldberg's journalistic integrity.
You know, Laura, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but of all the people out there, somehow this guy who has lied about the president, gone to just all kinds of lengths to lie and smear the president of the United States, and he's the one that somehow gets on somebody's contact and then gets
Somehow.
Goldberg appeared on MSNBC to respond to Waltz's claims.
The simple truth of the matter is on March 11th, Mike Waltz sent me a message request on Signal and I accepted it. That's the entire story.
The Atlantic has published what it described as additional messages from the group chat saying, quote, people should see the text in order to reach their own conclusions.
So let us continue
Yeah.
down the path of this. So it's important to also know that
There we go.
the hell happened there? Weird. So before we go on, we need to talk about classified versus sensitive information. So in the US, classified material is determined by one of three people: the VP, the president, or heads of departments. So in this case, Pete Hegseth. So basically, Pete Hegseth can just decide that something's not classified and declassify it. On the flip side of that, there are sensitive information, like national security interests, that is just kind of like deemed sensitive. It's also important to understand that under espionage law in the US, doing what we're about to see Hegseth do would see anybody in the military get court-martialed, and such espionage carelessness with this kind of data carries the death penalty in the US. So like these are serious things. So let's go on to the not sensitive classified war plan material. Pete Hegseth, team update. Weather is favorable, just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are a go for mission launch. 12:15 Eastern Time, F-18's launch, first strike package. 13:45, trigger-based, F-18, first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Okay, it's also important to note that under the Geneva Conventions, you're not allowed to like do this. So like this is also breaking international law.
It's not a okay. It's a Geneva suggestion.
Suggestion.
Yeah, the Geneva suggestions, really, right? Which again, just to reiterate, a lot of them are made up because of Canadians in World War One. So
and also keep in mind that when like, even though like everybody was really happy that oh my god, the name just like poofed from my mind, 9/11 terrorist guy that Obama killed.
Osama bin Laden.
Yes, thank you. One of the like, yeah, anyway, like there was like controversy even around that. But anyway, terrorist target is at his known location or should be on time, which by the way was the target's girlfriend's apartment building. Also, strike drones launch MQ-9s. 1410, more F-18s launch, second strike package. 1415, strike drones on target. This is when the first bombs will definitely drop, pending earlier trigger-based targets. 1536, F-18, second strike starts. Also first sea-based Tomahawks launched. More to follow. We are currently clean on Operation Security. Godspeed to our warriors. I don't know. This looks like attack plans to me.
Yeah, I mean, those are very clearly attack plans. Like they've literally broken it down by the hour and minute, right? And again, this is Hegseth who has literally broken it down by the hour
He
and minute.
copied and pasted it from some like.
Yeah, it's like he just fucking copy pasted it from like an email he got from the Pentagon. Although to be fair, he probably didn't get it in an email from the Pentagon. Someone probably texted it to him on Signal, and that's how it's in that format.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? Like this is just like the Signal chat we know about.
Jesus.
Do you think there's not like other Signal chats?
Well, that's the thing. Okay, so actually, this is really interesting. I'm glad you bring that up because it's like I saw a Reddit comment about this earlier, where like it's like someone like courtesy of the billionaire tech bros and fucking the White House these days. It's like someone was like, "Oh yeah, dude, just use Signal, like top tier security. You don't like got no problems at all." And then they were like, "Oh yeah, great idea," because they want to do this kind of thing to avoid the congressional oversight of having their like official phones, right? And like. So you have
everything's supposed to be recorded. This is literally a way to get around that.
Exactly. So imagine like we have this, and like I can't imagine what the one for like the actual intelligence group looks like. And if they're smart enough, they're not using it. If they're idiots, they're using it, right? And like again, just to reiterate the fact that Steve Witkoff was in Moscow while this was happening using Signal, and after the the Russians were like, yeah, we found a way to break into Signal, right?
But like, they didn't even have to do that. He went in to Russia, probably with his personal phone. They didn't even need to hack Signal. They just need to hack his phone.
Yep. And like that's that's where you have another national security issue. And like
Acosta this week was talking about how he was on the plane with, I think it was, can't remember. Oh, it was the Trump administration when they went to China. Back in 2018, I think he said, and they were like provided burner phones because they were like, the second we enter this country, the Chinese government is going to have access to your phone.
Yep.
So they weren't allowed to bring like laptops or anything. Like everything was burnered.
Yeah, because the way it should be, right? You're entering a hostile country, and you're an official, right? They're going to be looking for all that
100%.
information.
They'll be like, the second you stepped off that plane, they were into any personal devices you have.
Yep.
Fucking idiots.
Yeah.
And then they had Waltz at one point writes, VP building collapsed, had multiple positive ID. Pete Cruella, the IC, amazing job. Vance just writes, what? Like, what the fuck are you even talking about? And then Waltz writes, oh, sorry, like typing too fast. The first target, their top missile guy, we had positive ID of him walking into his girlfriend's building, and now it's collapsed. Excellent. Good start. Emojis? Is this how we're like fist bump American flag?
Fire? Like this is very like boomery. I gotta mention that. This is very boomery. Jesus Christ, Steve Witkoff.
Right? Like this is just like insane. So that's like kind of the end of that. That's what's been like released.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to mention this real quick because like this has become like the first, I should say, of like something like the Iran Contra affair, where it's like, oh yeah, the press found out about something that like we're definitely not supposed to do, and someone has to face consequences for it, right? But Ollie North, who was the guy who took the fall for the Iran Contra affair, like he's now on Fox News. And I just want to mention Pete Hegseth is a commentator for Fox News.
Yeah. So you bring up Fallout.
Yep.
So far, Trump has been standing behind these morons because loyalty means more. Yep. However, late Friday, Political ran this article I guess word is that Waltz might be the fall guy here. So there's not much in this. It's just saying that like they have a contact, and it looks like Trump is seriously considering firing Waltz, which is like the bare fucking minimum.
Yeah,
like
considering that what they did was
gone too, because he's the moron that like put war plans into it.
Considering what they did was technically high treason, I think firing is being a little bit generous here.
Right? So far, Trump is standing by them. Caroline Leavitt released a statement saying President Trump continues to have the utmost confidence in his national security team. Well, then Trump's a fucking moron, including National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Who knows, right? Trump, and I guess it kind of depends how long this goes on for too, right? Because one thing Trump doesn't like is people not liking him. And he definitely isn't going to like people thinking they're morons. So we'll have to see what happens in this, but that's sort of like the one of two big stories. This week. Did you have anything else that we've missed, or like anything else you want to talk about with this? Because it's just,
I mean, I think we kind of covered everything. Like, for those who haven't seen it, because I think it's a really funny watch if you're ever like curious as to like a little bit more about the Iran-Contra affair and why this is a big deal. American Dad literally did a satire song about how Ollie North betrayed the country by selling missiles to Iran. And it's almost as if like,
I remember that.
Yeah, and it's almost as if these guys have like now betrayed the country by deciding to use Signal to get around congressional oversight so that they can just start randomly bombing people. And
They don't even need to do, because Congress isn't really doing much oversight right now.
Exactly. So I mean, like, why are you bothering to hide it when you can just like do your job normally and still probably get away with it, right?
Sure.
So like, and that's the consideration that we were just talking about earlier. Like, we know about this chat. What about all the others that they're probably having all on Signal that we don't know about, right? Like, just insane to me that this is the way we're operating these days. Like, insane. Yeah. Great job. A+ management of the fucking biggest military on the planet.
Well, and now our last story. If anybody dares tell me I have Trump derangement syndrome again, I'm going to lose my fucking mind.
Yeah.
Because Trump is officially disappearing people in the US. So some of you may have heard about the deportation of Venezuelan migrants. Alleged members of the Trend of Aragra gang. I don't know, I probably said that wrong. This is just fucking insane. They're literally rounding people up off the street, putting them on planes to El Salvador prisons. Not even like the country that they should be sent back to. It should also be pointed out that maybe some of these people are criminals, maybe not. Maybe some of these people are US citizens, maybe not. So let's look at a timeline. And again, I will like put references and stuff in the notes, but March 14th, 2025, a presidential proclamation was made. This in itself is fucking insane. President Donald Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, aiming to expedite the deportation of alleged members of the Venezuelan gang. So for those of you that don't know, the Enemy Aliens Act basically means, the last time it was enacted was World War II when they put Japanese in internment camps. And it basically is a proclamation where the US needs to be at war, and then they can like bypass so that they can do things like, you know, deportate people without due process, put them in concentration camps, that kind of shit. So he enacted that. March 15th, legal challenge initiated. The American Civil Liberties Union and Democracy Forward filed a lawsuit on behalf of the 5 Venezuelan men facing imminent removal under the proclamation. Now, it's also important to point out that ICE had to meet 2 of 3 requirements to consider somebody a member of one of these gangs. 1, tattoos. 2, Venezuelan. 3, picture on social media of horns, which is like this for people that don't know. So like, does Cruz have a tattoo? Because there are pictures of him doing the Texas horns on his social media. So that's a thing. What the fuck? So the ACLU got on this. A temporary restraining order was issued by U.S. District Judge James Borsberg. Issued a temporary restraining order blocking the deportations and told the Trump administration to turn those planes around, which they did not.
Yep.
Fun fact, you might not know this. On Friday, there was another, I think it was the ACLU again, filed a lawsuit against the signal stuff. The judge that was drawn was Borsberg again, just like by chance. And like, I'm sure he's just like, fucking fuck. Why me?
I'm going to be so busy.
And it's also important to note that Trump has done this like campaign now against this judge, calling for like his impeachment, saying he's a liberal judge and that he was appointed by Obama. This is incorrect. He was promoted into the role that he's like this state federal judge by Obama, but was originally appointed by George Bush. And this was the judge that blocked Trump's tax returns from being released. So this is not some like left-wing liberal ass judge.
Yeah, this is a judge who probably,
judge.
Yeah, this is a Republican judge who probably knows how to do his job pretty well, right?
Yeah, and he's showing incredible integrity, I might add.
Yeah.
So despite the TRO, 2 flights carrying migrants departed after the order. The flight that was in the air, the Trump administration said that he had no jurisdiction to turn it around because it was over international waters. Fucking crazy. March 16th, flights land in El Salvador. And these migrants were sent to the Terrorism Confinement Center, which is a massive prison that holds 2% of El Salvador's population. And is well known for like, you go in that prison and you disappear.
Yeah.
So this is like a foreign prison in a full-blown authoritative government. None of these people have had due process. They don't know what's happening. They don't even know people are fighting for them in the US. They're not allowed visitors, phone calls, lawyers, nothing. It's fucking horrifying. March 17th, there was a judicial response. Judge Boasberg expressed concern over the administration's actions and ordered detailed information about the deportation flights. To which the Trump administration said, no, that's national security information. You can't have that. What? March 26th, an appeals court decision was filed. And then it's not on my timeline, but on fucking Friday, I don't know if you saw this. Actually, let me try. It's worth pulling up. Christy, did you see the Christy Gnome video?
I did not.
Oh my God. This is like fucking crazy. Okay, here it is. I think this is it. Yeah. This is worth like watching.
Tough talking message from Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem from inside El Salvador's most notorious prison. But as Les Trent reports, it's a $50,000 Rolex on her wrists that ended up making headlines.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is facing intense backlash today for this photo op at the world's most notorious prison, known as the Hellhole.
If you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face.
She recorded the video in El Salvador in front of a cell holding dozens of bare-chested, tattooed prisoners.
Do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted.
This is prosecuted. Not really. You'll be removed without due process. And like, they like fucking lined up these guys so that she could do like a fucking photo op.
Yeah.
This is disgusting and everybody should be absolutely disturbed. Yeah. Are some of these men probably horrible? Yeah, probably.
But also, What is the likelihood that some of them are just like American citizens who just happen to have tattoos?
But like, not even that. Like, if we look at El Salvador, he just started. He like claimed national emergency and just started rounding people up.
Yep.
Like, some of them are terrorist criminals.
Yeah.
Others of them aren't. They just like disappeared people that were like speaking out against what's his face, the president of El Salvador and shit. And Trump's paying them money to now take people from the US without due process who could be American citizens. Oh, and this came out this week. Pam Bondi. So did you hear about the probably the Tesla vandalism and stuff? Yeah, okay. So Pam Bondi set up an FBI task force to investigate the Tesla vandals as domestic terrorism. And then Trump said that he would like to prosecute those people, remove their citizenship, and then send them here. What the fuck? I
know.
And then like podcasters in the US are saying, "Oh, we're on our way to a constitutional crisis." What the fuck are you talking about?
No, you're so far past
beyond that.
Yeah, you are like, you're not just you are so far past being on your way to constitutional crisis. You are like neck deep in it.
You aren't just a chapter in Anne Applebaum's next dictator book. You are like the topic of the book.
Yeah. Like okay, so I just want to mention this too, because I feel like it's worth bringing up the military junta in Argentina during like what was it, 1974 to 1983, where like, you know, people were just being disappeared for any sort of political dissidence or like any sort of perceived association with certain political ideologies, right? And like that's what you're starting to see here. Is like they're using a very convenient target, you know, Venezuelan gang members in this case, to be like, oh yeah, we can totally do this. But then, you know, what differentiates, you know, just as a person of color, what differentiates what a Venezuelan looks like from what a Mexican looks like, right? Like I've been told I look Spanish, Italian, and Nepalese before I've been told I look Filipino, right? Which is really funny because I feel like I'm very clearly Filipino. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm white, but I thought you were Filipino like the moment I met you.
Yeah, which is where it gets like, which is where you have that like, okay, well, you know, white people don't, no offense, but white people don't really know what people of color tend to look like.
Right? No, we
Right?
think they all look the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, not me, but like the population.
Yeah, generalization, right?
It's like I had a friend growing up who was Japanese, and she was like constantly called Chinese in high school, and she was like, I do not look anything like a Chinese person, people.
Yeah.
Like I am very clearly Japanese.
Yeah.
Not all of us look the same.
Exactly, right? And like the reason why I bring that up is because, you know, with what happened in Argentina, it was just a convenient political opponent that they were able to target and then basically just, you know, disappear, i.e. murder and like throw in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
And like, you know, that was 30,000 people over the course of what was it, about 9 years, which, you know, not a lot if you consider like on a year by year basis, but still that's 30,000 people who just died.
That's a lot of people.
Now, if you, yeah, but then like scale that up now, right? And then with the picture that we just saw, you know, just, I don't want to make the direct comparison to like Auschwitz, but it's one of those things that just like, you know, you're putting people in prison camps. Like you're literally putting people in like these massive prison camps intended to just like.
Trump thought he could get away with lining them up in the streets and shooting them. You're out of your mind, because
Oh,
he
yeah.
wanted to shoot American citizens during his last term.
Yeah.
That were protesting outside the White House, and what's his face, the guy that he took security away from, John Bolton, talked him out and was like, no, the military is not going to shoot people.
Yeah, they're not going
like,
to shoot
why?
American
Why
citizens.
not? You think Pete Hegseth is going to tell him no?
Yeah, and that's where you have the problem now. Like, well, you're just conveniently shipping these people off to another country which does not have the same human rights record as like the United States or Canada, and to
without
be
any kind of due process at all.
yeah, and without due process, and like you're doing that to get rid of people, right? And that's the goal. You're specifically trying to just get rid of, and if not murder, at least just conveniently lose and disappear.
Well,
people,
if Trump
right?
can't murder them himself,
Why not
it's
have
like,
El Salvador
like his
do it?
opponents? I'm sorry, but like John Bolton, I don't agree with him. He's kind of was terrible, and like you aligned yourself with Trump, so like geez, the leopards are eating people's faces from the leopards eating people's faces party. But like you took away security protection from somebody that has like known threats from Iran. Like that is 100% Trump being like, maybe Iran will take care of them for me.
Yeah, if Iran takes care of you, that's one less headache for me, right? And
Yep.
like this
I
is
didn't directly kill him.
yeah, and this is where
These are Hitler tactics.
Yeah,
this
these
is what
are
Hitler did when like, and something that people don't understand about Hitler. It wasn't like Hitler just woke up one day and was like, oh, today we're gonna like kill a whole bunch of Jewish people. No, he tried to do that, but what happened was Germans were like, what the fuck's wrong with you? And they rose up. So Hitler had to backtrack and build up really slowly in blaming immigrants and Jewish people, etc., until the night of the long knives. Like it was like 3 years before Hitler started actually putting people in camps that night. It's not like an overnight thing. And like Trump is literally following a modern day Hitler campaign.
Yeah, draw the parallel, right? He was out of office for 4 years while Biden was in office, and then he comes back in office, and now he's doing the exact same thing.
By the way, Hitler also was in jail, and
yeah.
Hungary is also a great example of this. Orban was kicked out of office and then was like, oh shit, I need to figure out a way to like get serious. And it wasn't until that second term where shit started to go. And if you listen to experts like Anne Applebaum et al. She's like an expert in how authoritarians take over countries. And she was like, the majority of them were in once, got booted out, and were like, fuck you. And then they come back and they just start doing exactly what we're seeing Trump do. The difference with Trump is he's doing it faster, which is terrifying.
Which should be extremely alarming, right? Because like we're already in a, again, extremely politically tense, and like, you know, tensions have never been higher in the world, like just in a geopolitical sense. And you have this country that was formerly the global police officer and now is basically threatening to be the global fucking, you know, dictator, right?
Well, yeah, because they were bought off by the mob, which in this case is Putin.
Yep, courtesy of Russia, right? Like Russia won the Cold War without firing a shot. They got the presidency, right? And like you're kind of bringing it back to what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, this is a pending constitutional crisis. No, you've been in a constitutional crisis for the past you've been in constitutional crisis for 4 months.
January 21st.
Well, I would argue like since January 6th, right? Like,
yeah, that's true.
You know, really, that's kind of where it all started. Like you had basically an uprising in the Capitol to keep this guy in power.
Which the Biden administration was like, yeah, we don't need to like move on this fast, which was like a huge error.
Yeah, they should have moved on it like right the fuck away.
Instead of, I can't. Like, and all this norm shit is just, so I don't know if you're into, and I won't spoil anything because it's like a lot of people love these books and stuff, but the Wheel of Time is one of Rob's like favorite book series. And they have like a show on Prime now. It's not really my thing, but like I watch it because it's like his favorite thing in the world. But we were watching an episode last night where so they're like, and I'm gonna like totally butcher this, and I'm sure like some Wheel of Time person is gonna come for me in the comments, but like basically there's these like, have you read these books, Rio?
I have not.
No, okay. So there's like these Aes Sedai, which are like women wizards basically. And they have like factions, and they're all run sort of by like one leader, and there's like 4 factions. And there's this actress that is playing sort of a side character this year, and she's this like Middle Eastern actress that see if I can find her. She always plays like these characters that are like not evil but also not good. So she was also in The Expanse. She was like your token terrorist in 24. I know as soon as I like bring her up, you'll be like, oh, I know who this person is. Here she is. Cher. So she is in this show. She's just like amazing. I love this actress so much. Her. This is like, yeah, she's so great. Anyway, she yeah, so she was like, she's such a good actress. Anyway, so she's this like Aes Sedai that like used to be in power but isn't in power anymore, and was like sent off to be an advisor to like one of the queens of the like big realms in this series.
Right.
And that queen had to send her daughter to the Aes Sedai Tower because her daughter showed signs of channeling, which is like the magic in the show. So like she was like, oh shit, my daughter has to go. And then her daughter, the princess, was like attacked, and so the queen got pissed off and like came with her envoy to the Aes Sedai Towers, and this Aes Sedai came with her. And so last night's episode was basically this episode about like her trying to weave her way back into power and like undermining the Aes Sedai of her faction.
Yep.
And what was so interesting about it is she would like threaten people and like be very like Trumpian, but like better at it. And then at the end, she would be like, so she's like talking and like threatening this Aes Sedai of hers. And then at the end, she's like, thank you, and goes through like all of the norms of like thanking her for her time. And like, I was just like,
a little bit of casual gaslighting.
Right. And I like turned to Rob and I was like, and this right here was like the best scene ever to depict the problem with norms.
Yeah.
Because she was like threatening this Aes Sedai and being like, you're an idiot and I'm going to take power back. And then at the end, she's like, well, thank you for your time. And then like bowed and left. And I was like, what is happening? Which she then did with the leader, who's called the mother of the Aes Sedai. Then she went and did it with her. And I was like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
But that's like what's going on in the US, right? Like the inauguration was covered normally.
Yep.
Right? Like
instead of as like, you know, a critical constitutional crisis and like major event in the country.
It was like talking about taking Greenland by force in the inauguration speech.
Yep.
And fucking NBC was like betting on who would get booed louder. Like, what?
Like, no, you should be looking at this as,
It's insane.
yeah, you should really be looking at this as like, this is the rise of a dictator, right? And like, we've talked about it before because this is my favorite book. Like, the Dictator's Handbook literally talks about how you go in, you start culling supporters, you start, you know, if you really want to maintain power, you go in, you cut the number of people that you need to depend on to stay in power, and you keep that number as low as you possibly can. And part of that, just in a democracy, happens to be you make people disappear, right? Like, because a lot of that does also has to break down to, you know, you still have to survive an election, technically, for now, but like, you know, give it 4 years, what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, anyone who's going to cry like Trump derangement syndrome, like just because you're not the one currently being targeted, you know, there's a very eloquent poem out there written by a former like Nazi who literally was like, you know, first they came for the communists, I didn't speak up because I was a communist, then they came for the trade unionists, then but then they came for me and no one could speak up for me. And like, that's how they do it though, is they divide and they conquer.
That's what's so scary about these disappearances.
Yep.
Is like all of the like even the Bulwark, who they're all former Republicans.
Yep.
And they were like, the thing is like, when are they going to come for Tim Miller? When are they going to come for Sarah Longwell?
Yep.
When are they going to come from John Lovett from PodSave? Like,
Yep.
these are all American citizens that are speaking out against Trump. And some of them are like former Republicans. Like, Sarah Longwell worked for Bush.
Yep.
Like, these are not like,
these aren't like nobody Republicans, right? Like, these are people who are high up.
well,
and, like,
they were high up, but they were also people that like, or Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol is part owner of the Bulwark. And he was like, he was the crazy one on Meet the Press on Sundays.
Yeah.
Like, he worked for Bush. And it's funny because he was on a Bulwark event and Tim Miller was interviewing him. And he was like, what would like young Bill Kristol, like George Bush Bill Kristol, think of all this? And he like looked at the audience and he was like, I've made some mistakes.
Yeah.
But like Bill Kristol was in the Bush administration, like an administration that had an illegal war in Iraq. These are not people that are like apologetic Republicans. They are like hardcore Republicans. Well, not anymore. Now they're like, oh shit. And fun fact, Tim Miller and Sarah Longwell are both gay.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know how all that worked. I was like, how do you rectify these, like your identity with like you were working for George Bush?
Yeah.
And Tim Miller was actually the the lead communications guy on the Jeb Bush campaign.
Yeah.
So like these are not, these are not,
these are Republicans.
yeah, right. Anyway, so like maybe we could just end with something funny because I already sent this to you, but like it just makes me laugh, so I'm gonna share it.
Oh, perfect. If we're going to share pictures we found funny on the internet, can I share the one I showed you earlier?
Yeah. So for our audio listeners, the meme I put up says when you're accidentally included in a war plan group chat, and it's like Vader with his like entourage, and then Big Bird.
Okay, I'll quickly share mine real quick. So I'm just gonna present, and I wanted to show this one because this makes me laugh. Because for those who can't see it, it's Pierre Poilievre in front of one of his like typical like signs, but it's been edited to say "shit the bed" because Buddy somehow managed to fumble a 25-point lead in the polls. So like, way to go, Pierre.
I'm sort of like, I'm torn because I want to use like a meme for our thumbnail. And I'm like, I don't know. I might save the shit the bed one for when he loses the election.
Oh,
I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah, because that'd be perfect moment for it, right?
Please, Canadians, vote
Yeah.
against Pierre Poilievre so I can use that.
Yeah. Canadians, don't forget to get out and vote.
Vote
April
against-
28th
not
is
for,
election
like-
day.
Not for policy and shit, for so that I can use the meme.
Yeah. Vote for us so we can use the meme. If anything else, it's hilarious. So,
Okay, so on that note, we've been going for a long time, like 2.5 hours, because it's been insane.
Yep.
So we will end it there. I'll post on social media when our next one's going to be, because I'm not sure yet.
Yep.
But until then, we will hopefully see you in the next one, and hopefully it won't be as terrible as it is now. But I wouldn't bet on it because things just somehow keep getting worse.
I guess we'll find out by Friday. So,
Great. See you later, guys.
okay.